You're listening to 8158 Stories of Sacrifice, where we honor the bravery of the first responders and the families who stand behind them. Real people, real stories, real heroes. This is 8158. Disclaimer. This episode discusses suicidal ideations and extreme content that may be triggering to some. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to 8158 Stories of Sacrifice, the podcast that honors the lives, service, and sacrifices of first responders and their families. Today, we're diving into a conversation that every first responder and those who support them needs to hear. Joining us is Sergeant Michael Sugrue, a retired law enforcement officer, Air Force veteran, and the co-author of Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. Michael's story is one of service, sacrifice, and survival. After years on the front lines, he faced a battle he never expected, one with trauma, PTSD, and the silent weight carried by so many in uniform. In this episode, Michael opens up about his journey, the breaking point that led him to seek help, and why he's now on a mission to break the stigma around first responder mental health. We'll discuss the real impact of cumulative trauma, the importance of peer support, and what departments need to do to protect those who protect us. This is an episode about resilience, healing, and finding the courage to speak up. If you or someone you love is in this fight, you are not alone. Let's get into it.
Welcome back, everybody, to 8158 Stories of Sacrifice. Our today's guest is Sergeant Michael Sugrue. He wrote a fabulous book called Relentless Courage. And I would encourage everybody to go ahead and either download that and listen to it by Audible or buy the book if you prefer to read. So please welcome Sergeant Michael Sugrue. How's it going?
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate you being on here. It's definitely been an honor. I had the opportunity to listen to your book. Man, I tell you what, it was a roller coaster.
Yeah, it is. I lived it. So yeah, lots of ups and downs, but it ends on a positive note. So that's a good thing about it.
Yeah, it was pretty gritty, towards the end, and very emotional at times. And I just thought it was great. I mean, just seeing it through your eyes, hearing it from your voice just made it more impactful.
Well, that's kind of the interesting thing is that, we first published the book back in 2022, end of April, and we just did at first hard copy, so paperback, and then eventually hardcover. I think Kindle like a month or two after that, but we waited a year and a half after that to do the Audible, and that's one of my biggest regrets because I wish we would have done the Audible sooner. Personally, I don't like to read books. I don't have that same focus and concentration with post-traumatic stress injury. And I know especially like a lot of military veterans with TBI, traumatic brain injury, and just people being busy, right? I mean, people have busy lives. And so when we decided to do the Audible, there was only one way we're going to do it, and that was to do it in our own voice. And I got to tell you, it wiped us out. I mean, we did it for a full week. And when we did it, we relived everything as if it was happening in that moment. And it wasn't just simply reading a book. So I tell people all the time that this Audible, it's almost like, watching a movie or listening to a movie. I mean, it's just powerful, and it's straight from our heart and soul.
Yeah. And you were helped by Shauna Doc Springer.
Yeah. So actually interesting story. So Dr. Shauna Springer, she's a psychologist, PhD. She actually worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs for years, and she worked with hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of combat veterans. and also has worked with first responders. And so she truly gets it. She is a culturally competent clinician. And if you go back to right before COVID happened, we actually didn't know each other. And she reached out to me on LinkedIn, just seeing the advocacy I was doing towards mental health and suicide prevention. And she wanted to set up a phone call, just kind of like an intro phone call to meet and kind of see what each person's doing. And so we did. And she started telling me about her work with stellate ganglion block, which at that time I'd never heard of, which is a medical procedure to treat the physical symptoms of PTSI. And we talk about this in detail in the book. But then I told her my story, which is in the book. And after we got done with that conversation, she asked me, she's like, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, well, I've been asked this before, but I said, I just don't think I have what it takes to get that done right now. And like I mentioned earlier, with my focus, my concentration, my drive, I just didn't think I could do something like that. And so we left the conversation alone. About a week later, she hits me back up and she said, look, your story is just really sticking with me. And I've heard hundreds and hundreds of stories, but your story is going to save countless lives. And she said, I want to do this book with you. And at that moment, and we didn't even meet in person, I knew in my heart it was right. And, she's graduated Harvard. She'd already written 3 books. I think a book by herself, collaborated with a couple other people, very well known, very established. And so we started on this journey. And it wasn't until almost a full year into the project that we actually got to meet in person. We did everything via Zoom, like 2 hours every single week. We were meeting on Zoom. And what makes this book so unique and so different than any other book that I know of is that, you get 2 things. You get a real life, gut wrenching, true story, but then you also get the balance of having a psychologist come in and break everything down, explain it in very easy to understand terms, and truly show the human behind the badge and behind the uniform. And so every single chapter except one is in this very unique format where it starts out in my voice, my story, and then she comes in and breaks it all down. And the exception to that is there's a chapter by my friend John Davison, who's a Vietnam veteran and a 30-year reserve officer with my police department, where he tells his story about the effects of Vietnam. And then Doc Springer comes in and breaks that down and explains it as well. And when I say that she explains it very easy to understand, I mean that anybody who's never even met a single first responder or a military member, they're going to truly get it. They're going to truly understand it. And so that's why this book is for everyone, not just first responders, not military members, definitely their loved ones, their family members, but also just anybody out there in the community that wants to really learn about what we do and how it affects us on a daily basis.
Exactly. I mean, I was definitely impacted by the book. I mean, I was just like blown away.
Yeah, and I think it's meant to be. It's not anything I ever planned. It's not anything I envisioned. When I medically retired from law enforcement, I was just going to live a quiet, retired life. And there was a chain of events that happened where I started doing interviews, podcast interviews all over the world. Eventually that led to public speaking. And then now it's led to this book. And the book it's saving, not only careers and relationships, but it's saving lives all around the world. It's been sold in over 8 countries. It was a #1 seller, both in the US and Canada, for over 40 weeks total. And it's it's remarkable. I mean, it really is. And I poured my heart, my soul, my everything into it with the hopes that it's going to help other people that are suffering in silence like I did for far too long.
Right. It seems to be the normal thing that we've come across. I shouldn't say normal, but it's like every time we talk or interview a first responder or something, they always seem to have suffered in silence and are not allowed to let those traumas out. I just interviewed a captain out of Wisconsin, and he suffered a similar situation as yours. and he was ultimately fired from his job, and because he was told not to talk about his traumas by his department, which was sad because it was helping him kind of overcome a lot of what he was going through.
Well, that's the thing, is that the culture doesn't allow for it. And that's what we need to change. And that's why I do the work that I do, because the reality is, as first responders, whether you're a firefighter, a paramedic, a police officer, a dispatcher, we're exposed to hundreds and hundreds of traumatic incidents over our careers. Whereas the average person, they may have one or two in their entire lifetime. And we could have upwards of 500 in our career. And you think about that, it's not normal. I mean, it's normal given our careers, but it's not normal for any human being to be exposed to that level of trauma. And, the old school mentality is that we just brush it off, we deflect, we don't internalize it. We don't know these people. It doesn't bother us. And, sometimes we use gallows humor where we try to joke about things to kind of brush it off. And that works in the beginning. But eventually all these things build up and build up and build up, and they get to a breaking point. And for me, I had served 6.5 years in the military, and then 8 years into my civilian law enforcement career, I was involved in a fatal shooting where unfortunately I had to take someone's life in order not only to save my life, but the lives of other people. And that was my tipping point. And it wasn't so much the fact that it was just that shooting. It was all those 8 years before that of all this unresolved trauma that I never talked about, I never dealt with. I just kept it inside. And the sad fact is that suicide is the number one killer for police officers and firefighters. And we are much more likely to die by our own hands than to die in the line of duty. And that's a fact. And the other reality is that whether you're a firefighter, police officer, we spent hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of hours over our career training on things like firearms, defensive tactics, emergency driving, rescuing people, putting out fires in the case of firefighters. But how much time do we spend on ourselves, like really taking care of ourselves? And the other thing is that if we did that, we would actually be obviously much healthier, both mentally and physically, but we would be better firefighters, police officers, dispatchers, and paramedics.
Exactly. If you had that help and that backing from, your superiors, it would definitely have a huge impact on your departments and the well-being of other officers as well. I think so.
Oh, absolutely. And, the funny thing is the solution is so simple, and it requires, especially our leaders at all levels, to be open, honest, and vulnerable themselves. Because if they start by sharing their stories, like you said, this captain was, and they show really how it's affected them and how they've overcome that and been successful, then other people below them, their subordinates, are more likely to reach out to them and open up themselves. I just got hired to speak at a really large agency here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I mention this every time. I'm like, I'm grateful to be here. I'm willing to tell my story, but I guarantee you that all those people in that room when I spoke, they all have their own stories, because we all have stories. It doesn't matter how long you've been on the job. We have stories before we started the job, right? We've all been exposed to things, and things keep happening. It's part of life. And that's why you have to address these things as they come up.
Right. Yeah, address them now before it's too late, because when it's too late, then the damage digs in and it's hard to get rid of later.
It does. And I almost became one of those suicide statistics. I was trying to purposely get myself killed in the line of duty. And the thing is, when somebody kills themselves, there's a huge ripple effect. Obviously it affects their immediate family, whether it's their spouse, their children, their loved ones, their blue family or their red family, as far as their work family. But once there's a suicide, those family members especially children, are much more likely to commit suicide themselves. And the same thing could be said that oftentimes, especially in very large agencies, when there's a suicide, there's usually more to follow.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I know you talked about moral injury in your book, uh, something a lot of people don't fully understand. Can you explain what that is and how it impacts first responders?
So, basically, moral injury is when we do something in the course of our duties, whether it's a firefighter, police officer. An example, like in my case, a perfect example was that I had to take someone's life in order to save lives. Now, my shooting was completely justified. It went through multiple investigations. I even went through a federal lawsuit where we were cleared. Everything was done by the book, within policy, within procedure, under the law. But taking someone's life is against my moral code. It's against my values, my ethics. And that incident, it happened on December 27th, early in the morning, 2012. And here we are in 2025, and it still affects me. It's going to affect me the rest of my life. And that's something that people don't think about. They just go, oh, well, the outside world would say, well, you're just doing your job. That's part of what you do. That's what you signed up for. And the reality is, yeah, we signed up saying we're willing to do that if we have to, but no one ever wants to have to do that. And when it does happen, not everyone, but most people, there's going to be some kind of effect. And like I said, for me, it's changed everything in my life. It's affected everything. It's something that I'll never forget. So that's one example. But again, it's when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing in the line of duty as a first responder, but then it conflicts or goes against, your moral code or your ethics or your values.
Right. Right. Now, kind of going back to that culture of, you got to tough it out. Um, how do you shift the mindset of one and encourage them to heal from suppressing that pain?
Well, you have to start in the training academies, and you have to normalize of having these conversations, addressing it, making it part of the culture. And you can do that by bringing people like me or, senior instructors in the academy to have a day or half a day where it's devoted to them talking about the realities of how this career has affected them physically, mentally, how it's affected their relationships with their spouses or partners or children, other family members, but just being real. You're planting that seed. And then once you get out of these training academies and you start the training process, in the case of law enforcement, we go through a field training program where you're literally paired up with senior training officers, usually for a few weeks at a time. And then you transition to another training officer. And this goes on for months. But during that time, every call you go to that is potentially traumatic, you make it normal where the training officer has a discussion with the trainee. And again, they're open, honest, and vulnerable themselves first, and allow for there to be a trusted, safe conversation where there's not going to be any negative ramifications on, making probation, finishing FTO, or future assignments or promotions. And you carry that up the chain. So like my case as a patrol sergeant, I do that with the people I supervise, that lineup before we hit the streets. Maybe I bring up a traumatic incident that happened the shift before, and I start the conversation. I open up first and talk about how that affected me. Maybe it affected my sleep. Maybe it caused me to have nightmares, or maybe I went home pissed off in a bad mood and my family's walking around on eggshells, around me because they don't know what happened. And I'm not using my communication skills to talk to them and express that I had a bad day. It wasn't them, but I went to a horrible call, not sharing the graphic details, but just kind of saying, look, here's what happened. And I need some time to decompress. But it's literally having these conversations and making them normal, making them part of our routine, making it part of our culture.
Yeah, I I mean, I imagine it's probably a really tough thing to want to bring that home to your family.
It is, and I made a huge mistake. And when I speak publicly, I talk about all the mistakes I made because I want people to learn from that. And I made a mistake day one in the police academy where I said, you know what, I'm never bringing work home. I'm never going to talk about the job. This way, I'm protecting my family. I'm protecting my spouse, protecting my daughter, because I don't want them to know how bad or how dangerous the job is. And again, I'm not advocating for sharing graphic, gory details. But, simply coming home and say, look, I went to a bad car accident and I literally saw somebody die in front of me. I mean, that could be the extent of the details. And you say, look, I'm sorry if I seem off. I'm just, I'm down right now. I'm kind of in a bad mood, but you're letting your family, you're letting them in, you're letting them know, but you're also letting them help you. Again, you're building this trust, you're building the safe communication. I didn't do that. And so when my shooting happened, literally for those 8 years, I didn't talk about anything at work as far as anything traumatic, anything that was going on, about how it affected me. I just would drink too much, or I'd isolate. I try not to be in social settings, like do all these things to avoid it. Yet I was making myself worse, and I was deteriorating my relationship. And in my case, I eventually lost my marriage. But I think if I would have gone back and started that healthy communication from day one and made it part of our routine, there's a good chance that we'd probably still be together.
Right. So in the darkest part of your journey, what was the turning point where you realized you needed help?
So I mentioned him earlier, and he has a chapter in my book, but his name is John Davison. And I met him on the job. We had a large reserve officer unit. So these guys were volunteers, many that volunteered decades of their life, and they would get paired up with regular officers. And my friend John was one of those. He ended up doing 30 years with my department, but we rode together for over 10 years. And we became very close, very good friends. He had retired, and this is after my shooting, after my lawsuit. This is in 2016. And he never talked about the Vietnam War. He never talked about post-traumatic stress. He kept all that stuff inside. And he was going through a bunch of personal things where he had lost a relationship of decades. He's never married, but basically it was his wife. He didn't have kids, but he had dogs he loved very much, and they both passed away. And everything in his life was falling apart. And I knew something was off, but like most people, and not now, but I took that face value answer where you go, is everything okay? Are you good? Is everything, do you need anything? And usually we just, they say, I'm good, I'm fine. We just take that and we carry on. But I knew something was off. And a week after Thanksgiving, 2016, I was on duty. I was a day shift patrol sergeant getting ready to go home, and a suicide in progress comes out. And it turns out to be my friend John. And I literally just got to the trauma centers. The ambulance brought him in, covered in blood, in and out of consciousness. He had slit both wrists, stabbed himself in the torso multiple times, OD'd on multiple prescription medication. And I literally had like 30 seconds with him before they rushed him off to emergency surgery, trying to save his life. And I remember sitting there in the hospital for hours waiting for him to come out of surgery. And I just felt this overwhelming sense of guilt of why I didn't do something to stop this or prevent it. Why didn't I see the suffering of my friend and how bad it really was? But at this time, I was also purposely putting myself in dangerous situations at work, trying to get killed. And I started thinking about my beautiful daughter and what would be the effects on her if I were to do that. And so John survived the surgery. He went through recovery, and a month after that, on the anniversary of my shooting, I literally just broke down in my car, and I was just bawling at what a mess my life had become. In that moment, I pulled out my phone, I called my watch commander at my police department, and I asked for help. But it was the actions of my friend John Davison that saved my life. I mean, literally, if that wouldn't have happened, I don't think I'd be here today. That's what woke me up and pulled me out of the darkness and allowed me to see the light and allowed me to get help.
Uh, a lot of people don't see that side of what you guys go through on a daily basis. They just see what you guys do on the job. They might just see you in passing, and they probably don't think that and realize that your job is that big of a deal. But obviously, you guys suffer through a lot of serious traumas.
We do. And, 99.9% of police officers, first responders, they're doing it because their heart's in it. They truly want to make a difference. They truly want to help people. They're willing to put their life on the line every single day for complete strangers, knowing that when they leave their house each day, they may not come back and see their wife or their husband or their children. Literally going out there and putting it all on the line for, like I said, complete strangers. And who else does that? Who else is willing to do that? Who else is going to come in the middle of the night when you're calling 911 on the worst day of your life and you need help? We are. And that's what we signed up to do.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are trained to be peacemakers and to save lives and to help people. And I always felt like, law enforcement officers definitely don't get enough appreciation from the community because, you know, it's like that stigma, the blue man bat type of thing. And it's sad to see.
What's ironic about that, and I expose this in the book, and I call it institutional betrayal or administrative betrayal, but we eat our own better than anybody. And oftentimes when our blue family or red family turn their back on us, that's what leads to suicide. That's what leads, pushing people over the edge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that the public doesn't realize, they don't know about, but it's happening to most of us. And it's happening every single day at every single agency across the United States. And, I know a lot of things have happened in the world, a lot of things have happened politically, but, there's a target on our back. And even when we're off duty, we have to fear for our safety, for our life, for our families' safety, and for their lives. And it's a tough job.
Mm-hmm.
Most people can't do it. But the ones that are there, they're giving their all. They're putting everything into it. And that's why I want everyone to read or to listen to this book, Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. Because I guarantee you it's going to change their entire perception. And I'll give you a perfect example of my life, what I did. So when this book first came out, and I go to the gym every single day, it's part of my routine to alleviate my stress, to manage my health, mental and physical. And I'd gone to this gym for literally like 15 years. And there was a few gentlemen in that gym who had no idea who I was, what I'd done. We would nod heads. We would kind of like say hi in passing, but we didn't know each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I reached out to these people who I knew had honestly bad experiences with law enforcement here in California, but also in other states. And honestly, I don't think they truly cared for law enforcement that much based on some of these experiences. And after hearing them, I don't blame them. Their experiences made me very angry and very upset on how they were treated. But I asked them to read this book. The Audible wasn't out yet. And I said, look, if you read this, I will take you out to lunch and I want to talk about it. I want to hear your honest thoughts. I want all your feedback. I don't want it sugar coated. I want to know what you think. Mm-hmm. And every single one of them, it changed their entire perception. Right. It changed the way they looked at first responders, but especially law enforcement, especially police officers, and allowed them to actually see the human side, not just the badge and the uniform, that non-caring person who's in charge. No, it allowed them to see the real us, the real human behind the badge and the uniform. And that's the power of this book. It has the power to bridge the gap in communities between law enforcement and the communities they serve.
Right. So now, talking about your book, Relentless Courage, we will return after this quick ad break.
The William H. Bill Butler Jr. Foundation is on a mission to honor first responders and support those who serve. We provide scholarships for families who have lost a hero in the line of duty, offer second chances to juvenile offenders who are working to rebuild their future, and help new recruits pursuing careers as first responders. Through generous donations and the sale of merchandise, we're building a community that uplifts, empowers, and creates lasting impact. You can be a part of this mission as well. Visit 8158podcast.com to donate or shop today. Together, we can support those who serve, honor those we've lost, and give hope to those who need it most.
Right. So now, talking about your book, Relentless Courage, doesn't just tell stories; it offers solutions. What are
Correct.
some particular steps first responders can take when they start recognizing signs of trauma in themselves?
Asking for help and admitting that you have a problem. And unfortunately, there is a reality too that in some agencies, depending where you're at or what part of the country you're in, like you talked about that captain in Wisconsin, it may not be a welcoming, friendly environment to facilitate healing or recovery from post-traumatic stress. And, that is one thing I'm trying to change. But in the back of our book, we have an entire resource section where there's 100% anonymous and confidential text lines, hotlines where you can call or text 24/7. You don't have to give out your personal information, and you can talk to other first responders on the other end of that who are specially trained on how to deal with trauma, also how to facilitate helping you get resources and connect you with different programs and different opportunities. But also in our book, we list these programs. We list retreats where you can go away for 3 days or a week where there's no cost to you, and you can start getting help for post-traumatic stress injury, what I like to call it, versus disorder. But within agencies, there's also EAP programs or employee wellness programs. And oftentimes this can be confidential where they have hotlines and phone lines where you can reach out and you can get free therapy sessions for a set period of time. My only caveat to this is when you do that, you need to check the therapist and interview them and make sure that they are culturally competent. Make sure that they have worked with first responders and that they understand and truly get us and the unique things that we see and are exposed to. Because if you just go to a regular random, like marriage family therapist who doesn't know anything about first responders, it may actually cause a lot more harm and damage than good. And you may end up walking out of that office the first visit and never wanting to go back to see a therapist. But when you go to one who's culturally competent, who truly understands, it makes all the difference. And it truly starts that pathway to healing. And I want people to understand too that there's not one single solution to recovery or to getting better. You have to have an open mind, and there's a lot of different things that you can do to get better. And both Dr. Springer and I, we talk about this and we show a pathway to healing in our book.
So you've talked about some of the responses from everyday people. Since you released your book, have you gotten any feedback from first responders? Do you have any stories that you can tell that have really stuck with you as far as the feedback?
Well, first off, I'll tell you this. Anybody that's watching or listening to this interview, I challenge you, if you go on Amazon right now, type in Relentless Courage, the book will come up. As of today, I think there is 600 and what is it, 62 reviews. And of those, I think there's about 515 actual written reviews where people are writing like multiple paragraphs. I mean, literally pouring their heart and soul out on Amazon. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I get so much joy out of reading this, but people are sharing straight from their heart and soul how this book has literally changed their life. And that's just one simple example. But again, we're talking about over 515 actual written reviews from readers and listeners from all over the world. But I have to also tell you that I get messages almost daily. I'm on every social media platform you can imagine. You just have to type in Sergeant Michael Sugrue, LinkedIn, Facebook, IG, X, TikTok, Parler, Truth. I mean, you name it, I'm on it. And I get messages. And a lot of times, the coolest thing I've read over and over is I've had spouses or partners of first responders who found out about the book. They actually read it first, and then they got their husband or their wife who was a first responder to then read it. And then for the first time in their relationships, they actually sat down and had a full-on conversation about this. Because the thing is, it laid the foundation for both sides to show, I mean, what are the chances that this random guy from California is telling, your husband or wife's story in this book? Because that's the thing is, and I tell people, I'm not special or unique, and nothing that I've been through is. I'm just willing to talk about it. And my story is their story. And people that are listening to this and watching this, when you read or listen to Relentless Courage, you're going to be reading or listening about yourself. And also, I've had the opposite happen where first responders have read or listened to it first, and then they had their spouse or partner read it, or their teenage children. I had my daughter read it when she was 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
I wouldn't recommend this book for young children, but I would say 12 and above. I think it's appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I think it sheds light on really how this job and this career has impacted you. And it's going to explain things and fill in the gaps for them. But most importantly, it's going to open up this discussion that most people have never had in their entire lifetime or their entire relationship.
Yeah, I talked to Captain Adam Myers about your book, and he does follow you. I mean, he knows who you are. I don't think he's read or heard the book yet, but I did recommend him to go ahead and do that because I told him you guys have lived a similar life. You've gone through the same, almost identical situation in your life and all the traumas and everything that you've gone through.
And what are the odds of that, right?
Yeah.
And it's actually much more common than you think. I mean,
Right.
and that we don't think it is. Like, I know when I was struggling and suffering, I thought it was only me. I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought the way I was feeling was not normal, and that, I could have been farther from the truth. And when I started my recovery and I started meeting all these other first responders, other men and women who, paramedics, firefighters, police officers, dispatchers, where they were telling the same stories. They were having the same effects on their lives, and that's the thing is it is much more common than we think. And at some point, I guarantee you that this career, this profession will affect you and it will affect your loved ones. And you can either be proactive about it and address it now, or you wait till it's too late.
Right.
And in my case, unfortunately, I waited till it was too late.
Right. It seems to happen a lot. It's that it gets past that point to where people don't realize it or they just let it slip by them and it's too late. Just like the captain I was telling you about, he did the same thing. He waited till it was too late, and then everything just came crumbling down on him. Same thing. Lost his family, you know, kids, everything, job, the whole 9 yards. I think the only difference with him was after he got his help, he was actually got hired back onto a department where he is a captain now, and his department fully supports what he does because he runs a nonprofit group called Stop the Threat, Stop the Stigma, I believe, and they fully support everything he does. He speaks about it. He's open about it. And I thought that was unique.
And see, that's exactly the solution that I talked about, because when you have a captain at a law enforcement agency, that's very high up, and that's a leader within the department. And when you have somebody like that who's leading by example and showing that, hey, here's what I went through, here's what I lost, but here's how I overcame that, here's how I came out the other side. That's going to create a culture where people truly support it. They feel comfortable talking about it. I mean, they're walking the walk. They're not just talking the talk. And that's the thing, is that we need more of that. And so I don't know that captain, but I commend him because he is saving lives. I guarantee it. Again, you talk about a ripple effect. Well, that's a positive ripple effect.
Right.
Because if you can affect one life, then that person decides, you know what? I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to share my story. I'm going to help other people. And that's what I want to happen, is I want everyone out there to share their story.
Right.
Because it's going to help you, but it's going to help other people. It's going to save lives. And that's the solution to this whole thing.
Right. And that's kind of the whole premise of this podcast, is to, help people get it out, to share their stories so they don't have to keep it bottled up inside. I'm not a licensed therapist or a counselor, but I know, when talking with somebody else about my mental health issues, it helps me to talk and to let those things out. So I don't have to keep that weight and bury it. I think that's a very awesome thing to just get it out, even if it's with a total stranger. If somebody's willing to listen, just let it out.
Absolutely. And I commend you for the work that you're doing, and that's how this got started for me. It was a single podcast interview that I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
A guy that I didn't know reached out to me and asked me to be on a show. I told him I'm not interested. And thank God this guy harassed me in a good way and backed me in a corner where he basically made it where I couldn't say no. And it was that podcast episode that changed everything for me. It set me out on this path and this mission. Right. And, it doesn't matter. Like, if you can touch one person, you're a podcast host, you may have hundreds, eventually thousands of shows. And if you only touch one life, it's worth it.
Yeah.
But I know you're going to touch countless lives. I mean, much more than that. But again, if it's one life, it's all worth it. And that's the way I look at it. And so again, thank you for what you're doing as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Honestly, this whole podcast thing wasn't really started on the mental health aspect of it. It was started because my cousin was killed in the line of duty, and we felt like we needed to speak out against that, and to try to get more support for law enforcement. And knowing my cousin, he wanted us to support other first responders as well, because he was such an amazing, loving person. And as we progressed, we had come across countless people who were dealing with PTSD, all the traumas that they've gone through. And then it just hit me. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is why we have to do this. This is important. These are the people that protect us daily. They're out there risking their lives for people they don't even know. And they're going through all these things. And it's like nobody's there to help them. So what can we do? I mean, this is how I do it, I guess.
Absolutely.
This is how I contribute.
And shedding light on that and what we do, I mean, we need to be better at it as far as organizations, as far as police departments and fire departments. We need to bring the public in and, bring down the veil and show them exactly who we are, that we're just like them. We're fathers, we're mothers, we're parents. We have our own personal issues that we deal with just like them, whether it's a death in the family or medical issues or financial issues, issues with our children, issues with our relationships. And then we have, all the issues from the job. And so, but again, we don't do a good job at letting them in, at showing them who we truly are.
Right. Internalizing it seems easier than it is just to let it go, but in the end, probably best just to let it go. Let it out and get the support for your family that that you need, so that they can understand you better. That's kind of
Absolutely.
like what I go through with Brianne, because I suffer through a lot of childhood traumas and stuff, and she wasn't understanding, you know, why I was a hard communicator and why I didn't really talk so much. So I went to therapy, and now I'm starting to become, a better person, more open with her, and talk to her, and I allow her in the therapy session so she gets a better understanding of why I am the way that I am, you know. So it's definitely helped us a lot, and it's helped us communicate a lot more, because I'm not the biggest communicator, and this podcast has definitely helped me become that.
Yeah, you mentioned something that we haven't even brought up yet, but childhood trauma. And I talk about this in the book, but this was a subject for me that I was really in denial of and that I didn't really even think about much. I just kind of packed it away. And for me, I had a father who was a drug addict and alcoholic, and this happened in my early teen years. And it created kind of a sense of abandonment in my life at a certain point. And I never really realized the impact of that. I had a great mother, I had a great stepfather. I went on with my life, but I had been self-sabotaging literally every romantic relationship I ever had because of this subconscious fear of abandonment. And so anytime I got wind that something wasn't right or something wasn't going well, I would just beat feet and be like, I'm out of here. And, I suppressed that away. Fast forward, I become a first responder. And, then eventually I have my administrative betrayal or institutional betrayal, which is where my blue family again abandons me. And that's where this unresolved childhood trauma got brought back up.
Hmm.
And it was something that eventually I dealt with through a program called Save a Warrior. Remarkable program. Again, talk about it in the book. There's no cost to it. It's for military members, active duty veterans, first responders. But that program allowed me to reframe and process that childhood trauma and really see the impacts that it had on me. And what most people don't know, especially I think the public, is that, and I'll say most, not all, but most first responders have some form of childhood trauma. And here's the ironic thing is that trauma, that early trauma in our lives actually makes us very good at what we do as firefighters, dispatchers, police officers, paramedics, because at a young age, we become resilient, we overcome adversity, we become natural caretakers. And again, so we are these young children exposed to that, we overcome it, and then we become these heroes in uniform, right? And again, it makes us very good at what we do. But at some point, it all comes back up because we never dealt with it. And when I say all first responders have some form of childhood trauma, I'll qualify that by saying it could be as little as benign as, hey, you had a parent who loved you, but they were always working because they had to pay the bills. Maybe they weren't affectionate, maybe they weren't emotional, but they loved you, they provided. Or it could be like in my case, a parent who was an alcoholic or a drug addict, or
Or
it could be
it could be
physical abuse.
physical.
It could be
It could be
sexual abuse. It could be
right.
all these other things. There's a gamut of it. But again, those experiences often lead us to this profession.
Right. Yeah, I mean, childhood traumas are definitely something that are hard to overcome because a lot of times you're a child and you don't want to see that side of it, and sometimes you lock it away and you bury it, and then you carry it for until it explodes. Like in my case, I carried it for 40 something years, and then finally I just started getting severe panic attacks, and everything just started coming out, you know, and it was just terrible.
And I tell people, there's 3 layers of trauma. You have your childhood trauma, then you have your either battlefield trauma or street trauma. And then on top of that, you have your moral injury, or you have your institutional betrayal, your admin betrayal. And although these things are all interconnected, intertwined,
Mhm.
they have to all be dealt with. And in my case, I initially only dealt with, the street trauma, the battlefield trauma. I didn't deal with, and eventually the institutional betrayal, but I didn't deal with that childhood trauma. And for me, going to Save a Warrior, and that was after I retired, that was that last piece that I needed in my healing process.
So, moving on, how can leaders in law enforcement and other first responders in this field use your book as a lesson to better support their team?
Well, I think it's by clearly showing that, the way you're feeling when you read or listen to this, it's normal.
Mhm.
It's humanizing it. It's making it okay to talk about this subject and to bring up things that maybe people have been scared or apprehensive to talk about. It's laying the foundation. Again, it's not just a gut wrenching story, but you have a clinical psychologist who's an absolute expert in the field of military and first responder trauma, who is able to break things down and explain them in a way that it clearly makes sense.
Mhm.
It gives you the answers that you didn't know you were looking for, right? It explains why you're feeling the way you're feeling. It's explaining why you're having issues with your relationships, whether it's romantic relationships or family relationships or with your children. But it's giving you those answers, and it's laying that foundation to open up and have even bigger conversations within those agencies, within those departments.
Right. I had an interview with another officer. He was a younger officer. He was a firefighter before he got into law enforcement. And one of his things was, he hadn't experienced a lot of the traumas yet. He works in a small town, but his thing was he had a lot he just wanted to get off of his chest, and he worries that if he goes to his superiors about what he wants to say, that they'll look at him like, you know, he's not reliable or not dependable, and we can't trust him on the job, and he could be fired. He says, "There's nothing wrong with me. I just want to get it off my chest. Who do I talk to? I just want to talk to somebody about it, just so I don't have to carry it." And it's sad to see. It's all he wants to do is just talk about it.
And see, that's the reality, is that that's happening. And a lot of people feel that way. And that's why I highly encourage people to start with the book, read the book, listen to the book, use those hotlines, use those text lines, seek out some of these programs that are free, that don't require you to involve your agency or your department. Because unfortunately, if you work for an agency that does not have that culture, does not support you, there's probably going to be negative ramifications. And that's where you have to go outside of them and seek help. And, if people need help with that, they can reach out to me. They can send me a message. I will share resources with them. I will send them information and try to connect them with people who can help, people outside their agency. Don't give up or stop because you don't trust your leadership or you don't trust your department. Know that there's endless resources out there, things that I never heard about, I never knew about. I mean, I can't tell you how many resources out there. Hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of different things that you can do to overcome and get better from post-traumatic stress injury.
Right. Oh, Man, that's yeah, it's definitely a heavy weight to bear. PTSD is, as you call it, PTSI. Um, that was another thing that was talked about in some of the interviews. Is you can get hurt and injured on a job physically and get paid for it, but if you have any mental issues and you have to take time off, you don't get paid for that. Which I don't fully understand why how that could even be, because it's still trauma. It's still an injury, right? As you call it.
Absolutely. That's why I advocate for the difference, because that simple word disorder has a very negative connotation. That single word prevents people from seeking help or asking for help because of the stigma associated with it. It makes you think that, I have this disorder, I have no control over it, I'm just stuck with it, there's nothing I can do to get better. And the fact is, when you're exposed to trauma, especially repeated trauma over time, there is an actual physical and chemical change to the human brain. It's a proven medical fact. There's been tons of studies done. There's been imaging done, whether it's MRIs, CAT scans, where you can see brains before trauma, after
Mhm.
trauma. And again, it is a physical injury. There's a physical injury to the human brain, and it should be treated the exact same, whether a firefighter or a police officer has a bad back, a bad shoulder, a bad knee. It should be no different. It's an absolute injury which is caused by the job. It's caused by the profession. Thankfully here in California, it's presumptive. So if you're, in law enforcement and you have PTSD or PTSI, it's presumptive. Now, that's not saying that it's easy, because you still have to prove it. And there's still all these hurdles and things that you have to jump through. And workers' comp is not easy to deal with. They want you to give up. It takes a lot of work, but in the end, it's worth it. In
Yeah.
the end, it's your life. And that's what matters most, is you being here, you being present, you being healthy, and, being here for your loved ones. That's what matters the most. I used to be so focused on my career and the assignments and the next promotion. That didn't matter. What matters is the people who truly have your back and who truly love you.
Right. Yeah, your family are going to be there unconditionally. Um, we're finding that out quite a bit. Um, so, if someone listening to this interview sees themselves in your story, what would you say to them?
I would tell them, first of all, that, you're probably going to see yourself in my story.
Mhm.
And when you're reading this, and especially hearing from Dr. Springer, she's going to fill in the gaps and give you answers to things that maybe you didn't know, maybe things that you've wondered. You're going to see that you're actually normal. You're going to see that these feelings that you're having and the impacts on your life are absolutely normal, given all the abnormal things that you've had to see and deal with. And hopefully, this book and my story will give you hope, because I'm living proof that it does get better, that you can overcome this. But I will also tell you that the longer you take to get help, the longer it's going to take to get better. I will also tell you that this journey is not easy. There's going to be good days and there's going to be bad days. There's going to be step forwards and step back. But in the end, you have a whole new life waiting for you. And the life that I'm living now is better than I've ever lived. I'm a better father now. I'm a better partner to my fiance. I'm a better person. I see the world differently. I just, it's almost unbelievable. But again, it's possible. But it's not possible unless you raise your hand and ask for help and take that step.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to want it, and you definitely have to step forward and admit that there's a problem and an issue, and you have to have the strength and the courage and the resilience to overcome it. Just like in your book, resilience and courage, you definitely got to have that. overcome that situation.
Absolutely. But I promise you're not alone, and there is help out there.
Exactly. So what's the biggest takeaway and hope for your readers to walk away after reading this book?
I've said it a few times, but just knowing you're not alone, knowing that there is help out there, knowing that it is possible to get better. And it's never too late to start. And the sooner that you start, the sooner that you can mend those relationships, the sooner that you can start living a new life, a real life where you're present, not just physically, but where you're present mentally and emotionally.
Right. So people can find your book in Amazon. Is there anywhere else that people can locate that book?
Yeah, so the book, it's on Amazon. They have Kindle, paperback, hardcover. It's on Audible. You can also get it online at walmart.com, barnesandnoble.com. And there's other retailers out there. You can simply just go on Google, type in Relentless Courage, winning the battle against frontline trauma, and a whole bunch of different options are going to pop up. For me, Amazon's the easiest. Everybody gets things on Amazon. So, and Audible and Kindle, you can literally download instantly. And I even know, like, I'll tell people this because I did it myself, is I didn't have Audible and I signed up for a free trial. And when you do that, they give you so many months. You don't pay a dime. You just know when your cancellation date is. They give you a free credit every month. I downloaded my own Audible book and listened to it. And when the time came up, I canceled my Audible membership. So, just something to consider. I know people are on budgets. I know people have financial issues, but there's options where you can literally listen to this entire book and not pay a single cent. So just something to consider.
Right. Yeah, I actually bought the book on Audible, and I bought a copy to have. Um, and when I listened to it, I'm a truck driver, so I listened to it while I was at work driving. I got hands free and all that stuff, so uh, it was definitely an experience. And man, it was definitely a wild ride. And uh, you know, I hated having to hear your experiences on what you had to go through, and the loss of your blue family and how they treated you. You know, I would have expected a lot better out of a department than that, to be
I'll tell
honest.
you that I wouldn't change a single thing. I wouldn't change a single thing because it's led me on this path. And I know I survived all of that for a reason. And this is my purpose.
Right.
This has given me purpose in life. It's why I get up every single day. And so, as horrible as all that stuff was, and people will read it, they'll hear it. And a lot of people say, I don't even know how you're still here today. I don't know how you're alive.
Mhm.
And I tell them it's for a reason. It all happened for a reason. And I wouldn't change a single thing.
Right. I definitely commend you, man. My hat's off to you. I think you're doing a wonderful thing, and like I said, uh, Adam, he follows you. He knows about you. you know, he might be a super fan or something. I don't know.
Hopefully I meet him someday. So my fiance is from Wisconsin, and
Oh yeah,
I go back there. Well, now I'm going to be going back every other year around November, Thanksgiving time. So maybe we can hook up or connect. So that'd be great.
yeah. We'll get you guys in touch. And you guys
Sounds good.
can share stories.
And I appreciate you having me on. Keep doing what you're doing.
We promised Billy's wife, my cousin's wife, Sarah. She was the second interview, and she came back and she was like, "You need to keep doing this." I'm like,
Yes,
"Okay, I'll keep doing it."
absolutely. You're saving lives.
Yeah, I'm doing my best, and like you said, you found your purpose, and this was like a smack in my face. Like it took something so horrible to happen for me to find my purpose, and um, it's unfortunate, that my cousin had to lose his life, but yet we wouldn't have started this. Um, mission in this journey. This is our
Absolutely.
cause, to help our first responders and help them, you know, get over that stigma and help them to kind of go through their battles, maybe go through it with them.
Absolutely. He's still saving lives.
Yeah, definitely. So, uh, this is Sergeant Michael Sugrue. He wrote the wonderful book, Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Traumas. And it is an amazing book. I'm not a first responder, but it definitely moved me. And I tell you, it was well worth listening to. If you prefer to read it, you can go pretty much any outlet stores, primarily Amazon, um, Barnes and Noble, any bookstore or outlet you can find this book. I would encourage anybody to read it. Well, Sergeant, I really appreciate you being on here. It's definitely been an honor. Uh, my heart goes out to you for everything you've gone through, and yet it makes me proud to know that you know you're still here and you're doing something with what you've gone through, and you didn't let it go in vain.
Absolutely. Thank you. It was an honor to be on your show.
I definitely appreciate it, and just keep doing what you're doing too.
Absolutely. Never going
You're
to stop.
definitely helping people and saving lives as well, and that's what we got to do. We just got to keep at it.
Absolutely.
I'm still kind of a newbie, so I only started this 2 months ago.
You're doing a great job. Keep it up.
I'm working on it. All right, everybody. Sergeant Michael Sugrue. Thank you for joining 8158 podcast, and hopefully you enjoyed this show and tune in for our further episodes to come. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on 8158 Stories of Sacrifice. Every story we share is a tribute to the courage and resilience of first responders and their families. If this episode impacted, encouraged, or inspired you, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who supports first responders. Follow us on all social media platforms at 8158 Podcast for updates. 8158 Stories of Sacrifice is a team effort. Rico brings the stories to life through casting, writing, original music, and editing. Brianne Shipley as production manager, handling booking, social media, graphics, promotion, marketing, website management, and logo design. Please visit our website at 8158podcast.com. For questions, collaborations, or to share your story, our email address is contactus@8158podcast.com. Until next time, let's continue to honor the legacies and remember the sacrifices of those who serve, every brave man and woman on the front lines, protecting and defending us all. This is Rico signing off and honoring 8158.